Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. And so we have a special guest with us tonight, James Snapp Jr. And so we're going to be discussing some things to do with textual issues. We're going to pick the brains of James Snapp tonight, and we're going to ask him a few questions and see what his position is and what he thinks about certain things to do with textual criticism, Bible translation, and all the things that we usually talk about on this channel. And so James is getting his dose of caffeine before he has a marathon run with us. He's planned to go for 9 hours on this video. And so, no, I said to James he could keep it, between an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, however long he wants to go for. But James, how are you? And let us know what you've been up to lately.
Hello, Nick. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me on the program. I've been lately. I've been looking into various manuscripts related to the Christian story, and also looking through the Gospel of John for small variants that usually don't get much attention. It might not be mentioned in footnotes. They do have an effect on translation, so I'm gradually rolling through them.
Well, that's great. It sounds like a interesting project, going through and looking at variants that aren't in footnotes. That's that sort of sums up some of the work that James has been doing for a long time. James is a very details guy. And if you read through James's blog, oftentimes he's going through the tiny details of manuscripts to look at that evidence and to check out whether readings are genuine. And so I'm gonna ask James some questions. So I've written down a whole bunch of things here. And so maybe we can start, James, by you can tell us about your life in general, in a sense where what about your education? Were you homeschooled? Did you just go through the public schooling system, private education? What about your education, James? Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I was born in Wabash, Indiana, in 1967, and my parents raised me up with a very Christian environment. Our family has a long history. If you go back about 15 generations, my great multi-great grandfather was Everhard Snapp, who was a professor at Jena and helped out Martin Luther.
Wow.
So we've been at this stuff for a while. And I went to public school. The public schools in Wabash were very, I would say the personnel made a big difference. It all depends on how the people, the character, that's what is the key. And for those people who were in my schools, I get to know many of them very well. They were good, down-to-earth people, and were willing to respect everybody's freedom of religion, but also if they were asked, they would be happy to talk about Jesus. And then after I graduated from high school in 1986, I went to Cincinnati Bible College. It was a Restoration Movement heritage school, probably the best one of its kind. And unfortunately, they had some financial difficulties in the past 10 years or so, and now it no longer exists. But I was there when the faculty were the cream of the crop. I had scholars like Tom Frischke, R.J. Kidwell, Lewis Foster. Those were some of my professors that I would consider my mentors, and also Lee Mason, and also Daniel Dyke, and there are too many to name. So I graduated from there in 1990, and in a year I was on the mission field in Belize. So I spent with furloughs. I spent about 10 years on the mission field in Belize, and got married there and had kids. And then I looked at my wife and said, "Honey, I think the U.S. needs ministry as much as Belize does, because the Belizean culture was, I would say, a pretty even keel. Those who were Catholic, and those who were Anglican, and everybody knew what everybody else stood. I said the biggest problem in Belize was drugs, and that's probably still the biggest problem. And the only answer is Jesus." But I left behind a growing church there, and they're still there. So when I came back, I ministered for 4 years in Ohio, and then in 2005, I moved to Curtisville, Indiana. I was there until 2023, when after I got the jab, which cannot be named, I had a stroke, and that affected my elocution. It's still kind of funny. So if anybody thinks this is like a drug, he's like, "No, I'm not drunk. I just have trouble speaking. I have everything I talk about. I have to think ahead of what I'm going to say, and sometimes it gets too fast. I have to slow down and not very eloquent. So, but I'm working on it." So that's me. And
Okay.
as far as education, I have people sometimes ask, "Are you a doctor?" I'm like, "I have an honorary doctorate degree, but I prefer to just become brother."
Oh, that's good. And so how important do you see like having a doctorate or having an alphabet soup after your name?
Some people put a high priority on it. I do not. Tregelles was in every way as informed as Wisconsin Hort, and he was self-taught. So Tregelles is probably, I would say, a better example than guys who say, "Oh, I have this many letters behind my name, so therefore listen to me," because you wouldn't believe how many ridiculous statements I've seen come from educated people with the word doctor before the name. But it's like, the more I read the doctors, the more I think they've been taught how to misinform people, because there's no way they could be this bad accidentally. There must be a school of misinformation.
Yeah, that's a classic. And so how did you become interested in textual issues? What was the turning point or the spark that got you interested in this topic?
Well, I was always curious, even in childhood, by the footnotes in some modern Bibles. But really, at Taylor University once, I just happened to be there. My sister was going to school there at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana, a good school, and they were having a book sale. And among the books that was on sale, it was like, "We just want to give you these books. Take a bag." And one that I picked up was Christoph Lake's 1928, the text of the New Testament. So that book got me intrigued, and it just the ball started rolling from there, and just snowballed.
Okay, and so I guess, did you grow up in a King James type of environment, or was it you could use sort of any version in the church that you were involved with?
Well, I still have my grandma. When I was baptized, my grandma gave me a King James New Testament. I still have that out here. But really, we went to a fairly conservative, but not King James only. We used the New American Standard Bible was probably dominant. I used to do sword drills on the Bible Bowl. If you know what Bible is, I used the New American Standard version for that, and also the King James, the 1984 NIV. Now, when I say NIV, I'm talking about the 1984 NIV. The 2011 NIV, I avoid. But we were familiar with the NIV. The New American Standard would probably be most dominant. So there was a mix, because one of my professors in college was Lewis Foster, who worked on the Book of Luke for the NIV.
Okay. And so, was there a time when you started to question, the issues of, Textus Receptus text, majority text, critical text? Was there like a turning point? I guess you said you read Kersop Lake, but he would be more considered a critical text proponent, I'm pretty sure. And so,
yeah, Lake never really did publish a compilation, but he did publish the results of his research, and he was kind of sympathetic toward the idea of the Lishanic recension, but I don't think he ever really analyzed the papyrus evidence.
And so your position is equitable eclecticism, which sort of gets bunched in with your majority text, Byzantine priority sort of groups. What was the thing that sparked in your mind to go down that route? Did you become like a TR person for a while, or were you a critical text person for a while?
Well, I was never a TR person. I would say I leaned toward the majority text, but I also recognized when I looked at the evidence, there's obvious reasons there's clearly readings in the Byzantine text that are not the original. There's clearly the canons of textual criticism, but I call it textual criticism, but really I like to call it textual analysis, because that's really what it is. People hear the word criticism and think, "Oh no, he's criticizing the Bible." Like, no, it's something analysis.
Yeah, and I was going through some of your articles on equitable eclecticism on your page. So just this morning, I was going through that, and it gives a very good detailed layout of the principles of what you're advocating for. And so, I guess if anyone wants to know anything else about that, James has a website, the Text of the Gospels, and he has a search bar here, and so you can go and search for that. But this equitable eclecticism, an introduction, I went through the two parts here, and it's very good. It gives a very good understanding of sort of like the history behind this, but also in part two, which I guess if I just change the two there, it'll go to it. It gives it like a detailed sort of like canon, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth points, and then additional principles to examine the text, like something like conjectural emendations are not to be placed in the text, things like that. So it's a very, very interesting article. And so where did you get this type of information from, James? Is this...
that's all original to me.
Wow.
I'm just taking principles that were enunciated by Griesbach, and from there to Schultz, from there to Ruckman, from there to Trigels, and so forth. But I would press the brake though when you get to Nestle, because Nestle, even though he was a great scholar, he did not believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. If you hear about the Nestle Island text, they should realize neither one of these guys who this text is named after believed in the inerrancy of the Bible. And if you look at Nestle's 1902 book, you'll see him say plainly that Matthew made mistakes.
And that was what Metzger also said with Matthew chapter 1,
yes.
with the names in the genealogy, that Matthew probably made a mistake there. Instead of just saying Sinaiticus and Vaticanus have problems.
Yeah.
It's like, well, God has problems.
although it's not impossible, because there are ways, if you do enough hand waving, there's ways around it. But to the person coming to the text of the Bible for the first time, reading a mistake, or what appears to be a mistake, in the first chapter of Matthew, in verse 8 and verse 10, and then in Mark, reading what appears to be a mistake, again, this way is hand wave around it. But in Mark, when Mark says, as it is written in the Isaiah, or as it is written in the prophets. And so, and on my blog, Nick, I have a major piece of work where if you search for Mark 1-2, there's I think a 4-part research study that it did, and I posted the results on my blog. So I conclude that when it comes down to it, in the prophets is original, and Isaiah came along because scribes were trying to make the reference more precise. They thought, if Mark's inspired, why isn't he being more precise? So there's a definite scribal tendency towards specificity. Scribes tend to make the text more specific, not less. So that is, I would say, the one canon that I've contributed, which is prefer the less specific reading.
That's interesting. I was reading this morning in one of your articles that Dean John William Burgon had actually had a chapter in one of his books that was written, I guess, by Miller after Burgon passed away, but it was about the orthodox corruption of Scripture, which is usually we attribute that to Bart Ehrman.
Yes. Bart Ehrman should be paying royalties to the foundation, to the Burgon legacy, because he got the title straight from Burgon. I assume that Ehrman was well read enough to have read Burgon, and he just lifted that title because it's the same title. I mean, the variants are the same variants. Wow,
that's really interesting, because oftentimes I've said, Bart Ehrman has come up with a bit of a new concept, but it's interesting that that's something from Burgon, from his era.
Yeah. If you got one of these, there's a chapter. You'll find the chapter that's on the Orthodox corruption of Scripture, and that is, by the way, exactly what happened in, for instance, in the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus says on the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they not what they do." I believe Ephraim, in his writing, says this was changed by the Orthodox, who were offended by the idea that Christ prayed for God to forgive the Jews, and then came the destruction of Jerusalem. So the prayer, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," was excised. And on my blog, I address that reading directly in detail. If you search in the search bar for Luke 23:34, I believe it'll pop up.
Yeah, very interesting. And so, what are your thoughts on Dean John William Burgon? Is what I say about Burgon, or when I'm talking about the majority text movement, I usually say that Burgon was one of the pioneers for the majority text movement. Would you see it that way as well?
Oh, not entirely, because Burgon, he said repeatedly over and over, he said, "I will never be able to say loudly enough, the Textus Receptus needs to be revised." So Burgon was very straightforward and candid that was the case. But he said, we should not touch the text until we've done the research. We need to pull out more manuscripts. We need to analyze the lectionaries. We have about a half dozen languages that need more research on. So Burgon wanted to revise the text, but he said, we're not ready to do it. The thing that Western McCord are doing in his duration, he said, that is guaranteed to fail because there's simply not enough data to work with. So Burgon, I believe, in one of his writings, he said, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that, we need to do that. And I think he filled up both hands with things that need to be done. He said, And then after that's all done, then work on revising the text. As it is now, the guys that are revising the text, but he meant Westcott and Indigot. Those who are revising the text now, it's all going to have to be undone. So Burgon was very, very clear, and also he had the humility to say, I am not able to revise the text. I want to, but we simply don't have the data in my generation. It's going to be left up to another generation to do.
Okay. And so, so do you feel that Burgon was correct in his analysis, and that we now have enough evidence to do a reconstruction?
I would say, if you look at the things that Burgon listed and said, we need to analyze the lectionaries, we need to get a full database, and there are still manuscripts that are out there that haven't been adequately collated. But overall, I would say we are at the point, at least, where we can do the things that Burgon envisioned doing.
And so, how would you distinguish like your position from the majority text and from Byzantine priority? I know that oftentimes people will divide up TR people into, King James only, King James preferred, TR only, that type of thing. And so it seems in your grouping, there is the majority text and the Byzantine priority seem to be very popular.
Well, Byzantine priority, I would say that is a gross oversimplification. But I would say I would consider evidence from wherever it can be found, like Scrivener said. Let's get help from wherever we can find it. So I would consider readings from the Byzantine text, readings from the Alexandrian text, readings from the Western text, readings from the Caesarean text. And I would say once we have this evidence, we should consider each strand individually and see and then from there consider the internal evidence. Oftentimes, the internal evidence plainly says the reading in the Byzantine text is not original. There are various times when the original text says he, and the Byzantine text says Jesus. It's just not changing the meaning, making it go from vague to specific, or shining a brighter light on what the text already says. It's just making it say it more clearly.
Yeah, interesting. And so I guess the difference between like the majority text and Byzantine priority is a bit too Byzantine heavy, focusing on that, probably making a similar mistake that the critical text guys do with the Alexandrian priority.
The Byzantine priority, even though it's not a matter of counting manuscript, it's not turning the whole enterprise into a democracy. If you read Burgon, if you read this guy, in the intro to this, Maurice Robinson presents his case pretty well. But I still find in the Byzantine text there are obvious readings that are secondary. For instance, in Matthew 25:13, in the TR and in the majority text, in the Byzantine text, when I say majority and Byzantine, it's pretty much the same thing. They are divided in Revelation, but that's a special case.
Okay.
In Matthew 25:13, and you can look on my blog for that, I present evidence that says this Byzantine reading is plainly an accretion. It's a reading that was smuggled in from the lectionary and gradually became dominant in the Byzantine text stream.
Okay.
But when I say I want to use eclecticism, but I want it to be equitable, what I mean is that I don't want to assume, like Dan Wallace and James White tend to assume so often, even though It never comes to the forefront, but it's something that is in the background, lurking there. The assumption that's lurking behind the kind of eclecticism, and I say that in quotes, the eclecticism of Dan Wallace, of many of those in Germany, of Nestle and Allen, eclecticism. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I'll ignore that. In the eclecticism of Dan Wallace, of Nestle Allen, of the UBS text, it's not really eclectic. If you ever examine it, which I have, you'll find that it's 99% Alexandrian and about 1% Byzantine when they disagree. Now, overall, they do agree, usually, but those points of disagreement where Alexandria says one thing and Byzantine says another, they are almost always Alexandrian. And I do have a book where I lay out the data that shows that the eclectic text of Nestle Island is not really eclectic; it's Alexandrian.
Mm.
You can say 99% Alexandrian, maybe 1% Byzantine.
Okay, wow, that's interesting.
CBGM thrown in, still the additional Byzantineness of the text is negligible.
And so the CBGM material, it seems that they have stopped just going to the Alexandrian mostly, and now they're adopting some Byzantine readings.
Yes, some, but it's not really making as big a difference as people say. Because you'll find guys like Peter Guri saying that, oh, well, it's more Byzantine now. Well, yeah, a tiny bit, like a little bit.
Mm.
But if you go to my website, I did a post a while back calling it much ado about nothing. So you can see that, and if you pull that up, you'll see how little a difference the CBGM makes. It's basically, in terms of results, it's been so far a nothing burger.
Mm. And so what do you think about the labels Alexandrian, Western, Caesarean, and Byzantine like being demolished now, and we're just sort of looking at manuscripts, and the CBGM?
Well, the downplaying of text types, like Mark Twain said about the enforcement of his death, have been greatly exaggerated. I would say if CBGM makes so much of a difference, then why is the text still pronounced the same?
Mm.
Yeah, Dwayne says it's slowly moving Byzantine, but in terms of results, it's not that much more Byzantine than before. When you look at how many Byzantine readings they've taken out and how many go in, previous to the existence of the CBGM, I made a compilation of the Gospel of Mark, and about I would say almost a third of the readings that the CBGM made, I anticipated in my Greek archetype of the Gospel of Mark.
Mm. Yeah.
But also, one of the things to realize about the difference between my approach of equitable eclecticism and the approach of what's called reasoned eclecticism, which is really just Alexandrianism smuggled in with about 1% anything else, is that I don't assume the Byzantine text came into play through a Lucianic recension.
Mm.
This was really the fundamental theory of Hort. And when I say Hort, I say Westcott too, but I call him Hort because it saves time. So Hort had this theory of the Lucianic recension, and that was widely accepted because of what? Because of 30 conflations at most. Conflations, when we have when later on, when people realize that there are even conflations in the papyri, then they say, oh, well, I guess having conflation does not necessarily mean posteriority, even though it can appear that way. But if you have a conflation in a manuscript like P66, which you do, and you also have a conflation in Sinaiticus, which you do, and conflations in C, which you have all over the place, these are not indications of later date. They're like, I would say they're like coins that have been dropped in a well. And you can by looking at the date of the coin, you can see when something happened, but that doesn't mean that what you think happened.
Mm.
So when you look at Stritz's evidence, I have Stritz's book of Iron somewhere. There it is. When you look at this book by Harry Sturz.
I've got the same one just right here.
Excellent.
Mm.
His data showed that the conflations don't mean what Hort thought they meant. They do not necessarily mean that all the Byzantine text is a mashup of the Alexandrian and Western. So if you have the Byzantine text by itself developing and evolving, you could say, to use a scientific term, if you have the Byzantine text growing and gradually developing new readings, there's still at its base a very significant core of early readings. So Hort's idea to say, oh well, let's throw out everything that's unique to the Antiochian text. That idea is no longer valid. Mm. And I believe that Peter Gurry has said that he doesn't know of anybody who still believes that. Mm. Now, Dan Walls, I would say, is still a diehard believer in the Lucianian recension. But in my book, those who believe in the Lucianian recension, like in De Silva and others, that's going the way of the dodo.
It's very interesting, and so I guess usually the way that I explain it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that that Westcott and Hort, they were saying there's a Lucianic recension, but then when they found lots of papyri about 10, 20, 30 years later, they discovered a lot of Byzantine readings in these papyri manuscripts, so which disproved the Westcott and Hort theory. Is that an oversimplification, or?
Well, I wouldn't say a lot, maybe 150, but the thing is, they should have found any. Mm-hmm. It's like, how many does it take? Because one should do the trick.
Interesting.
To show you that you can't get away with just throwing out the Byzantine text because of a few conflations.
Mm.
And also that I would also point out not every conflation that Westcott and Hort said was a conflation is necessarily a conflation, because sometimes people write under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but maybe not as eloquent as other people do. Sometimes it's simply a point of style. When I say, I went and hunted and found and discovered, I might say many synonymous terms and mash them all together. And somebody else might say, Jim was conflating things, but actually Jim was just being a bit prolix or verbose.
Mm.
So if you have an Alexandrian scribe who has an allergy to verbosity, who compresses things and deletes things that are superfluous, then you get a concise text, but not necessarily the original text. So the what Hort saw in Alexandrian text was its conciseness, and he thought, well, concise is good and verbose is bad. That's why he rejected almost all Western readings that were verbose. But now we have the work of James Royce, who has shown conclusively that we should not take the length of a variant into account, because I believe that Nestle was on record saying, "Oh, we all know that we should prefer the shorter reading." That was a canon for years. That was a canon that the base text of the ESV, the base text of the NIV, the base text of the NRSV, that was built with that canon in place. But that canon has been shown to be faulty. And so there's a lot of work that once that was realized, somebody should have pulled a lever and said, "Okay, put it in reverse. Let's not do that." But like tuning a battleship, nothing happens overnight.
And so, wasn't there only 8 places where Westcott and Hort showed there was conflation?
Well, I would say Kenyon later on. Kenyon being in the generation right after Hort, they were kind of overlapped. Hort and Kenyon together, I would say they would in all have about 30 points. But you also have conflations in the Alexandrian text. You have in Colossians 1:12, and also in Jude. Jude verse 3 has a very interesting reading because in the Harclean Syriac, and in the Harclean group, that's 1505 and relatives. In the Harclean Syriac, you have this reading that says life, whereas most other manuscripts say salvation. Well, the Harclean group manuscripts are late, but that reading has to be early. And how do we know it's early? Because in Codex Sinaiticus, it has a conflation, says salvation and life. So again, it doesn't take many. All you need is that one, and you have a conflation. So clearly, something like the Harclean text was in Egypt already at the time of Sinaiticus. Otherwise, there would be no way for Sinaiticus to have this conflation in place in Jude. And that's not the only place in Jude. In Sinaiticus, there's a conflation. That's simply one that should be more famous than it is.
Okay, interesting. And so, when critical text people ask, where was the Byzantine? Where are the Byzantine manuscripts before the year 300? What do you answer to that?
I would say, well, the Byzantine manuscripts were around Byzantium. They were also in Cappadocia. They were in Turkey. They were in Crete. I wouldn't say necessarily not a monolith, but these would be texts that were spread out over Turkey and Greece, and then they trickled into the West. But in that heartland of Christianity, Asia Minor and Bithynia, and what became Cilicia, in those areas, there were no bishops saying this has to be our text. They would just transmit it spontaneously as the need arose. At the same time, the Romans were busy destroying as many Christian manuscripts as they could. We have records of the Romans going in and saying, "Hand over your manuscripts," and they would either get bribed or they'd bring up manuscripts and burn them. So the Byzantine manuscripts. Well, first one thing I would say, in Byzantium, because Byzantium is not dry, when you have manuscripts that are made of papyrus, you're going to have humidity, and when you have humidity, touch papyrus, it's going to rot away. And I would say, what happens to Byzantine manuscripts? What happens to everything? We don't have Byzantine manuscripts of the Gospels from those early times. For the same reason, we don't have papyrus manuscripts or anything else from those regions, because papyrus, when it's not dry, rots away. Unless it happens to be preserved under some remarkable conditions, which hardly ever happens. The papyrus that survived in Egypt survived there, not because of superiority of text, but because of favorable conditions, namely the lack of wetness, the lack of moisture. Once you have the lack of moisture there, then you can have a place like Oxyrhynchus, where conditions are favorable, to just preserve everything. They can preserve, you get receipts for your land and throw it away, and 2,000 years later, it's still there. All you have to do is find somebody that's determined enough to go dig it up, which Grenfell and Hunt were. in the late 1800s and in the early 1900s, that's when they did the first digs at Oxyrhynchus. And that's when they began to find the new papyrus, which was a whole new strata of evidence. But that was all tended to be Alexandrian. Certainly not all, as James White has falsely said, but mostly was Alexandrian because, well, that's the Egyptian text.
Mm. So I guess according to what you're saying, the favorable weather conditions in Egypt is really the only reason why they're older. Everywhere else gets tropical and gets rain and snow and things like that. That destroys the papyrus. And so we can't just say, well, these are the oldest readings because of favorable weather in a certain location.
Well, weather I would say was the dominant factor, but also don't forget there's also waves of persecution. Now, not it wasn't uniform. There were some areas that was pretty tame, but in the persecution of Decius around 250, and also Diocletian later on, these were waves of persecution that targeted church leaders and targeted Bible texts, New Testament texts.
Mm.
So when you consider that in the time of Decius, at the time of Diocletian, there was a systematic effort made by the Romans to destroy all traces of Christianity. So texts that survived because of either the Christians were clever and hid their books, or simply the Romans weren't systematic enough. But Diocletian thought that he had done it, but of course he was wrong.
Mm.
But he sure did give it a good try. So I would say those two factors. First, simple weather conditions, moisture in Asia Minor and Greece and Crete and Cyprus. Moisture. And second, the systematic effort by the Roman Empire in the days of Decius and Diocletian to exterminate the Christian Bible, the New Testament especially.
Wow, very interesting. And so just back to the Byzantine priority majority text movement and what you defend, the equitable eclecticism position. What's the history of this movement? Like I was saying, did Dean Burgon sort of start this, or like, because I know he defended the traditional text sort of over the Textus Receptus.
Yes.
So
I don't know if Burgon would be a majority text guy, but he would definitely give the Byzantine text the benefit of the doubt. He wouldn't say he vehemently opposed the idea of the illustrating recension, which is really once you have the Byzantine recension in your mind, then you gotta ignore the Byzantine text. If you look in, hold on a second. In this book by Kurt and Barbara Allen, you can find, if you take your time, you'll see where the Allens say very candidly, all the manuscripts that have the Byzantine text, we consider that irrelevant for the purposes of textual criticism.
Mm.
So they're very clear when they say if it's Byzantine, 9 times out of 100 we will ignore it just because of its source.
Wow.
And they say all the minuscules, or the vast majority of minuscules, there's a few glitches like 700 and so forth. But they would say the vast majority of minuscules are irrelevant, and they use that word exactly in the English translation.
Wow.
Irrelevant for the purposes of reconstructing the text.
Mm.
Whereas I would say, although you have strata of Byzantine, not every Byzantine reading is going to be old, but you can work your way down from the later Byzantine text, the KR, down to the family Pi text, which I would say has more weight than the later KR text.
Okay.
When I say KR, Family 35, same thing.
Okay. Okay, very good. And so, just trying to, I've been trying to sort of trace the majority text movement or whatever it gets labeled as. And I've got the J. Green interlinear, the Hebrew and Greek interlinear, and at the back it has a list of majority text readings in the back, and that seems to be sort of like the puppy feet of what happened in the 1980s or 70s and 80s with a revival of people going back to the Byzantine text and sort of, I guess, departing from the TR and also departing from the critical text and going back to a traditional text type of thing. And so what would be your understanding of the history of the modern majority text movement from your position?
I would say it's something that when people have looked at how the Lucianic recension for about 2 generations, the Lucianic recension held sway. That's what impelled both the revised version of 1881 and also the 1901 American Standard, and then later on the revised standard version of that came about in America. But a guy named Rubus, I forget if he was Estonian or Lithuanian or Latvian, Baltic anyway. But Rubus, who's not really as famous as Metzger, but he should be. Rubus was brilliant, and he presented. He poked a lot of holes in this theory of the illusionary recension that was as simple as Hort had made it out to be. So Rubus's data should have impelled a rethinking of Hort, but like I said before, the battleship once the battleship's in the ocean, it turns very slowly, and so I think a lot of the scholarship that we're getting now in America, unfortunately, is still built on that same foundation, which really shouldn't be there.
Mm.
Because if you don't have the illustrated recension, then the question is, where does the visiting text come from? Now, I would say, once the visiting text is in place, and by the time of Chrysostom, it was in place, at least from Matthew through Jude. Once Chrysostom's there, then it stabilizes after the reign of Theodosius, and when you get to Justinian, you have the purple uncials, which of course would be the deluxe edition, very very expensive to make. You have purple parchment for one thing, which was very very expensive to make, and then you had other purple parchment that was not real purple, but it still looked good. And then you had some manuscripts even being made with the silver ink. Now, of course, when you have the ink being metallic, what you get, and after you add a few centuries, is you get a bunch of holes, shaped like letters. But without it, they can still be read.
Interesting.
So by the time of Justinian, you have the Byzantine text firmly in place, and it dominates from that point on.
Mm.
Even in Egypt, you have the Byzantine text. You can look at lectionaries from Egypt, and you know that.
Mm.
See lectionaries in Egypt, and in the 800s there'll still be some that have the Alexandrian text, but when the Byzantine text comes, it's coming with a whole lot of steam behind it, and it is just overwhelming everything else. In Greek. Now, in the local languages like Semitic, the Alexandrian text didn't die out. It only went from being Greek to being local languages, like Semitic. If you look at the earliest layer of Semitic, which is preserved in some manuscripts that are in Spain, in Barcelona, you'll see that their text is still very much Alexandrian. Now, there are Western readings built in, because people don't realize sometimes, because of the word Western, we think when we think Western text, we think a text in the West.
Mm.
But in real life, the Western text was in Egypt just as much as it was in the geographical West.
Mm.
We have the Glacier Codex, G67, which was found and analyzed. It's a manuscript of acts, of half acts, and its text is very, very, very much a Western text. So it's not like, although James White has claimed, all manuscripts from Egypt are Alexandrian. No, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, I assume he doesn't know what he's talking about. If he did know what he's talking about, he'd be a liar. But I give him the benefit of the doubt to say he's just ignorant.
Mm. That's very interesting. And so, with like the critical text or the Textus Receptus, usually there's certain characters like people will point to Erasmus, the Complutensian guys, and go through to Beza and King James translators. And so in the critical text movement, we got Westcott and Horde and some influences before them. But so with the majority text movement, who are some people who we need to know about and who've done the hard yards, done the scholarship? Who would you say is like, what would be a little bit of history, modern history of those people?
I would say first and foremost, it would be Pierpont and Robinson. This copy is a little worn, as you can see, but Robinson here, this book is not only his compilation, but also his essays. He goes into detail about what you do when you hit Revelation. Now, of course, most of our terminology comes from people who are studying primarily the Gospels, and you get the categories of, okay, there's an Alexandrian text of the Gospels, there's a Byzantine text of the Gospels, there's a Western text of the Gospels, or Western text, because if there's anything that's consistent about Western manuscripts, is there's nothing consistent about Western manuscripts. There are numerous idiosyncrasies in all of them, where scribes have tweaked the text this way or that way. They're all trying to make the text more clear, but they figure out different ways to do it. Sometimes they make it clear by making it more concise. Sometimes make it clear, but usually they make it clear via embellishment. So definitely the Western text has a tendency toward embellishment. But also, I believe that the Western text in the West was connected to the translation of the Greek text into English. I mean, into Latin. So if you look at the old Latin text, like in Gigas, if you ever looked at the Devil's Bible, so the big book, that's why I call it Gigas, because it's gigantic, it's huge. In its text of Acts, it's Western, but not quite the same kind of Western as some other manuscripts. The patristic writer Lucifer of Sardinia. When people think of this, a guy called Lucifer, they he's the devil. But no, Lucifer simply was a name that lots of people had back then that means light bearer. So I see Dwayne mentioning Harry Sturtz, and yes, Harry Sturtz's book would be I would say a essential reading for anybody that wants to become acquainted with a more moderate approach to the Byzantine text. Now, like Sturtz, I would not say we should just swallow the whole thing, but definitely take the Byzantine text seriously. We have still English translations today, like the ESV, where I don't think the scholars who compile the text of the ESV really took the Byzantine text seriously. If you look at the text in 1975, it's not really that different from the text in 2005. And again, on my blog, I go through systematically comparing the Western Hort text to the text of NA27 and saying, hey, these are basically the same text.
Mm.
So that even though there's been all this wave of evidence from the papyri, it really hasn't had that big of an impact on the text when you get down to it. But I also would say the ESV's base text was obsolete as soon as it was made.
Okay.
As soon as it was made, I would say, oh, we've got new evidence coming in that should change this reading. And if you look at the SBL GUD by Michael Holmes, you'll see that he has improved definitely upon the Nestle text, and they still haven't caught up yet.
Mm. Well, and so just on the majority text there, so you got the Hodges and Farstead text, and so Farstead is known for his work on the New King James, and then you have the Pierpont and Robinson text. So what would be the differences between them, just sort of in a nutshell? Like, is there a lot of difference, or is it just sort of trivial minutia?
It's mostly minutia. There are some verses where it makes sense. For instance, in John 14:14, which is I'm looking at right now, in the Byzantine text in Robinson Pierpont, it has it and the Hodges Farstad don't agree. So even though it's called a majority text, some calls are not as clearly a majority as some other places. There are places where it's a close call, especially in Revelation, because in Revelation you have the text is basically divided between this kind of commentary and another kind of commentary with Andreas of Caesarea, and so we have copies of Revelation accompanied by the commentary of Andreas or other commentaries. You have different types of text, and so in Revelation, the dichotomy of this is Byzantine and this is Alexandrian, that falls apart. In Revelation, that simply doesn't work. I think that Juan Hernandez, whose work I look forward to reading very much when he ever finishes it, Hernandez, I think, has said there basically is no Byzantine text of Revelation, because in lectionaries, with very few exceptions, the Luxiel lectionary being one exception, they usually didn't have the book of Revelation in the lectionary. So for Revelation, you have to rely on a totally different kind of grouping, which makes Revelation kind of a special case. So when we talk about the Alexandrian text and the Western text and the Caesarean text and so forth, we're really looking at groupings that were made based on the text of the Gospels. When you get to the epistles, they're not as different as you may think. And when you get to Revelation, throughout those categories, because they simply don't apply. If you look at the majority text, you'll find that if you compare, which I've done, if you compare the text of Sinaiticus with the simple majority text, the majority text is more accurate. So even though the majority text is based on much later manuscripts, the date doesn't really matter. What matters is how well did the scribes do the job. That's the question that matters. Because when you have scribes like the scribes of Revelation, who are clearly tweaking the text deliberately and making little adjustments here and there. Now, that wasn't any big drastic change that would result in a different message to the text. But the scribe of Revelation in Sinaiticus, at least, Juan Hernandez has identified specific readings where he says this was a doctrinally motivated change.
Interesting. And so what are your thoughts on, I remember reading an article by Dan Wallace, and he said majority text people are modern day Marcionites. So what are your thoughts on Dan Wallace saying this?
Well, in a way, those are fine words, Dan, and not everything Dan says has stood the test of time very well. But I would say Dan Wallace has made various errors, and of course he's a tenure professor now. I think he's now a Presbyterian and has retired from his professorial work and is working now with the Center for the Study of New Testament Manuscripts, which I also work with. I've indexed various manuscripts there.
Wow.
And Dan is doing some good work, but there's also some work that he will need to undo, which I hope he takes a different look at. I had if you go to my blog and just search for the word Wallace, you'll see that I have probably tried to correct his work about 12 different posts over the years. He's made exceptionally bold errors, especially with the story of the woman called an adultery. In his classes, his creator courses, that he's taught many people there with, so the generation that has been matriculated through Dallas Theological Seminary, many of them have been fed a bad diet of misinformation. There are various claims that Dan Wallace makes that are just ridiculous. And I don't know if Dan Wallace cares, but he really should go back and undo some of the damage he's done.
Yeah, and I think it's really good what you've done there. Just, we need to hold scholars accountable for things that they're saying. If it's wrong, and I think everyone should really invite critics into their life, because that way someone's just doing a little bit of homework for them, and we all have blind spots here and there. And so having Dan Wallace, having you, and even James White, there's some things that James White said, he would be much better off just saying, look, I got it wrong about Sinaiticus and things like that. I got that wrong. James Snapp Jr. has done an article on it, and I'm in agreement now with that, rather than fight against it. It just seems so strange. But it doesn't seem like Dan Wallace fights against what you're saying. Definitely James White does fight against it.
Well, I found that he does something even worse. He's ignored me. Yeah,
and I think that's the worst thing when you actually critique someone and they don't even care. Where I kind of really value critiques, because sometimes they can be the only person who's actually gone through your work with a fine-tooth comb.
Yeah,
and so
it's like I critique James White quite a bit on my blog. I've never have succeeded in getting him to debate me about Mark 16:9-20. I wish he would, but when I critique a scholar like Dan Wallace, I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm trying to correct him. I'm trying to improve his work. It's like, hey, we're on the same team. But when you say something like manuscript 1333 and turn one manuscript into a few, that's not serving the church. That's simply spreading misinformation. So he said various things that just shouldn't be said, because they're demonstrably false. His claims about 1333, he said it was that the story of the woman called adultery in 1333 was an independent pericope. And if you just look at 1333, if you put up my blog and just search for 1333, I have a picture of the page itself where it says plain as day. On the page, anybody can read it and see. This is the reading for St. Pelagia from John. So it's not infinite. It says very plainly it comes from John, and it says very plainly for St. Pelagia's Day, October the 8th. So this was the reading put into the manuscript for this particular day. So in 1333, what you had was, this was a manuscript that initially, when it was made, did not have the story of the adultery. But when the manuscript came to be used in the church, of course they would use it for their feast days. And for St. Pelagia's Day, they needed John 8:2-11. So on this blank space between the Gospel of John, the beginning of the Gospel of Luke, that's where the scribe later on wrote to the story that we called adultery, beginning at verse 2. So, and then Wallace says a few manuscripts have it between Luke and John. No. In real life, this is in one manuscript, not a few. One.
Mm.
And it's not independent. It's very, very plain as day. Says it is from John.
Mm.
So anybody that can read Greek should not be able to make the kind of Greek statement that Daniel Wallace made.
Mm.
So I'm hoping that he will make one of many retractions.
Very interesting. And James, you said you're doing some work for the CSNTM. Are you able to talk about that?
Oh, sure. CSNTM is in the process of updating their manuscript viewer, and so things are kind of at a loss right now. But they should be a bit assumed with the new viewer and a new way of working with the virtual manuscript room in Munster. So when it's all done, it should be a great improvement. But in the meantime, if you go to CSNTM and if you register and they know who you are and they know the not gonna hurt anything, they'll volunteers index the manuscripts. So when you look for a particular passage, you can when you look for a passage, it'll bring up all the manuscripts they have that have been indexed to be able to look at that manuscript and take you to that exact passage. But to do that, each manuscript has to be paginated, one page at a time, which is mind-numbingly tedious, which is why most people don't do it.
Mm.
But I have gone through quite a few manuscripts there to index the end of Mark and also the story that we call adultery.
Wow. And so are you working like with Maurice Robinson at all on that project? Because it seems like that the last 12 verses of Mark and the PA seem to be your little pet projects. And so do you talk to Maurice Robinson much on these topics?
Now and then. Maurice, I think, is now writing a business authority textual commentary. I myself am working on a textual commentary on the Greek archetype of the Gospels. Now, this would not be a full, detailed, not like a master, but basically looking at the verses that most everybody cares about, because the little minutiae where there's just a matter between Jesus and he, nobody really cares about those things because they don't really impact on translation. If you have a translator who's just a little bit imprecise, you'll never notice the difference in the base text. But I look at, I zoom in my commentary on specifically on passages where the reading makes a difference in translation.
Okay.
So that should be ready in January. So hopefully I will have a new book, Nick, to throw at your head.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And so how many hours a day would you spend on this topic? Is this like, do you sort of set aside like 3 or 4 hours a day, or do you just when you're inspired to do something, you just cramp in 10 hours and then don't visit it for a few days? Or
yeah, some days more than others. Some days I have things to do, but I would say I spend at least an hour a day on textual matters. Sometimes to analyze, sometimes simply for devotions. Sometimes I'll look at the passage and I will look at the text and the variants and say, okay, even though I can tell for sure which reading is original, it's so interesting as an example of how did the church treat this text.
Mm.
This is when the text of Luke says that Jesus' father and mother, or does it say Mary and Joseph? How did the church handle that? When people in the pews, so if they have pews by then, but your average reader would say, "Wait a minute, Joseph wasn't his father," and so then the church say, "Okay, I'll have to walk you through this. We all know that Joseph wasn't his really father, but legally he was his father, and through his line of descent that we see in Matthew, that's Joseph's lineage. So his legal father was Joseph. So keep that in mind and just think legality. So when they had if the Romans had a birth certificate whose name was on it, Joseph's, even though Joseph wasn't his real father. But Joseph would be in his relationship with Jesus about how to raise him. Joseph would be considered a father. If you ever seen the movie The Young Messiah, this topic comes up. But you can see how there's a tendency in the church that they gradually became dominant. Not overnight, but it took centuries to say, okay, we give in to the people being stupid, and we'll just go ahead and say, okay, Mary and Joseph are his mother and father. So it was simplified for the people who were not smart enough to keep in mind all the backstory. So we'll say, so there wasn't anything in the church say, all right, we'll simplify it for you. You win. Just say Mary, his mother, and Joseph.
Okay, interesting. And so yeah, that's interesting. You're doing work on the CSNTM. If you could rewind back your time, go back 20, 30 years, and say to the younger James Snapp, what advice would you give, and what would you have done differently? Like with study, would you have learned other languages or other alphabets and things like that, or pursue different academic avenues?
Well, there's a saying to play to your strengths. So once I got into the groove of Greek manuscripts and so forth, I kind of focused more on the New Testament. But in retrospect, I would like to pick up on Hebrew, because right now, after my stroke, it affected my brain, and my Hebrew is gone. So I have a book over here and a book over there about Hebrew. So I'm hoping in the next 2 years to reinstall the files on Hebrew.
Okay, interesting. That's very good. Are you? So you mentioned that you're going to do a commentary. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yes, my textual commentary on the Greek archetype of the Gospels will look at points in the text that impacted translation. Now, not all of them, but the major ones, places where there is or there isn't a verse, or in Mark 9:39 where there is or there isn't and fasting, because I think that's an important one. That is one of the rare cases where it does affect, although not a point of doctrine, but does affect church practice. So in terms of what the church does, I believe that is as also important as what the church believes. So in terms of church praxis, should we fast before we attempt exorcisms? I would say yes. And on my blog, I present, again, like I mentioned before, a case for having and fasting in the text. Now, Dan Wallace has said he doesn't believe and fasting is original, but I do. And on my blog, if you go there, there's a 4-part explanation of why and fasting is original and why it was taken out. There was a anti-fasting tendency in the Alexandrian transmission stream. And if you look in the Sinaiticus, in the text of, I think, Tobit, you'll find a reading that would normally say fasting, it says something else. So I go into that on my blog, and those articles will be mashed up into a chapter of my textual commentary.
Wow, very interesting. And so I guess people going to your blog, they're going to get the draft work of the book. Yes. Of that you're going to do. So that's very interesting. So basically your blog is a bit of a testing ground for your commentary.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I would say that about 90% of what's going to be in the book is already there on my blog.
Wow. Interesting. And
so, for instance, like Mark 11:26, where here you see it and there you don't. It's like, how did it happen? I go into detail about how it happened, and often it's simply a case of parablipsis, which Bart Ehrman needs to learn how to spell, but also the tendency to omit was vastly underestimated by Hort. Hort, when he saw a shorter reading, even though he didn't prefer it because explicitly say that I prefer this because it's shorter, Hort did have a tendency to prefer the more concise reading just because it's more concise. But often, the concise reading is also one that could occur and is explained by the longer reading. So, the foundational premise of textual criticism is prefer the reading that explains the others. Now, in my experience, if you think hard enough about it, you can find reasons for both sides often. But in Mark 11:26 and in many other cases, you will find how you can see on the page how this phrase or how this verse or how this word could have fallen out by accident. And when you have an accident happen, you don't have a reason. That's why they call them accidents.
Yeah, very interesting. And so I noticed that Stephen Avery was in the chat there, and we've done some videos, me, Stephen, and yourself, about Sinaiticus and just chatting about those type of things. And so you guys used to work on a few projects together. Like, that's what it looks like when I'm sort of scouring the internet for information. It looks like you are chatting about something, Stephen's chatting about the same thing. You might come from different angles, but you're sort of both coming against, I guess, the critical text position. So what did you guys work on back in the day? So that would have been like 10, 15 years ago now.
Well, back in the days of Whelan Wilker's wonderful textual criticism group, before Yahoo destroyed it all, we used to go back and forth about all kinds of things. Usually, Stephen would come from a very pro-TR school of thought, and I would say, Stephen, it's not simple. So basically, anytime that the TR says this, I would like to say, well, I said, there's no point in talking to Stephen because I already know what he's going to say. He's going to say the TR is already right.
And so I guess coming from your perspective, James, you'd be considered a free thinker. Like, I guess, like in politics, usually people try and put you into a category. You're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're this, you're that. But I guess in the field of textual analysis, you would be a free thinker. And a lot of people use your material to sometimes come against people in other camps. So I guess it's like, I sort of liken it to like Ron Paul when he did his campaign. He was coming against Republicans, coming against Democrats, sort of coming against everyone.
Yeah,
but
Ross Perot.
Sorry, what was that?
Ross Perot's campaign.
Okay, yes, Ross Perot. Yeah, and so I guess you do have that free thinking aspect about you, and so how did you develop this? And like, do you put yourself into any category and lock yourself in there? Do you go, well, I'm this type of person, I'm pigeonholed here, or I'm with this group here, or do you just prefer to just be like a freelance free thinking guy?
Well, I tend to focus on the Gospels because the genres of the New Testament really should be approached individually. You have the Gospels, you have the Acts and Epistles, and then you have the general epistles, and then you have Revelation. And The ground rules vary for each genre, but I specialize in the Gospels. That's why in my textual commentary, although there will be a few excursuses, mainly I deal with the four Gospels. That's my specialty, and it's easier to focus on the Gospels because that's where you see the text types being maintained. That's where you see the Caesarean text in place. Was there a Caesarean text anywhere else besides the Gospels? I don't think so. Now, and by the way, Nick, I believe I was a believe. Maybe it's too strong, but I strongly suspect that the standardization of the Caesarean text happened when Eusebius was commanded by the Emperor Constantine to make 50 copies for Constantinople. I think that Eusebius took manuscripts there at Caesarea that had been brought there by Origen, and he matched them up with other copies that he had gotten from miscellaneous sources, and the result of his work was the Caesarean text. But the Caesarean text was not well received in Constantinople because they already had a text. So the text that was already there in Byzantium, that became the text of Chrysostom, and the text of Eusebius was basically ignored. So this would have been not full Bibles, but copies of the Gospels, 50 copies of the Gospels. But going to Constantinople, and later on, in the 400s, when the Armenian version was being revised, scholars from Armenia, when they visited Constantinople, they found what they would describe as a precious codex of the that they found, and they used that then to bring back to Armenia as the basis for the revision of the Armenian text that happened in the 430s. So after Mesrop initially made the Armenian text based on Syriac, the first revision of the Armenian text was based on a Greek text, which was Caesarean. So if you connect the dots, it's from Eusebius, who's getting his text from Origen, combined with miscellaneous texts. He puts them together, makes a standardization, and the way he makes a standardization was he creates the Eusebian canons. His contribution cannot be underestimated because this affected the text in all quarters of Christianity, in every corner of Christianity. His reference system was adopted. If you look in the Family Pie, if you look in the later Alexandrian text, you'll see the Eusebian canons everywhere you look. Oftentimes, it's in some of the more interesting copies, it's not in the side margin, but it is down in the foot of the page. So the copies that have the Eusebian sections at the foot of the page, I would say those give us a window onto what the text was like in the 400s. Okay, and if you happen to have a copy of Swanson, he has very helpfully collected samples of the various different forms of the canons, the canon tables. So thank you, Ruben Swanson, for all you've done. And also, I see a question from Dwayne. How can you get into the CSNDM project? You need to contact a guy named Mark Gaither, and he can point you in the right direction. That's Gaither, like a building a lawyer Gaither. Gaither. Gaither.
Okay. I'll ask a few more. I've just got a couple more questions here, and then we've got just a few questions from the audience, mostly from Dwayne. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on the LXX. Do you think that it is a BC document, an AD document, or a bit of a mix? Or
The what?
The Septuagint. Do you think that it is, like if you go to Wikipedia, it'll say it's 250 BC. But if you talk to certain scholars about it, like Jeff Riddle, for example, they might say, well, they think the early church made the Septuagint, or there's different views. And so what would your thoughts be on the LXX?
Oh, it took me a few seconds to process LXX, yes.
Yes.
Well, I believe that if you look at the story of Aristæus, that initially the Septuagint was definitely a BC project done in the time of Philip in Egypt. And if you look in the writings of Justin, you'll see plain statements to this effect. But also we have scraps, not very substantial, but very clearly surviving pages of Septuagints. So, and some of these, by the way, are there at CSNDM, the page views, where you can see this is a page of Septuagint. And also you have the work of Theodosian and Symmachus, the competitors working with the work of the initial Septuagint translators. Now, even though the initial work was on the Torah, later on the whole Old Testament, the Tanakh, was translated into Greek, but there was much less uniformity in the later books than there was for the initial Torah. So if you look at Karen Jobes' book, that Karen Jobes, her book Invitation to the Septuagint, lays things out very, very well. I would recommend that to anybody who has a question about it to look into Karen Jobes' book, Invitation to the Septuagint. I have a copy over here somewhere. But the idea that the Septuagint was made by the early church, this is basically nonsense. There was definitely a variety. There was variation, just like there was in different transmission streams of the New Testament. But clearly, at the base of it, the Septuagint was a BC project. Now, that doesn't mean that they were that once it was made, it stayed a monolith, because there were various ways, particularly for Daniel. In Daniel, the text of Daniel, people really didn't like it. So later on, they said, well, we don't like so much the Septuagint, so there's more like these Septuagints. So I think Peter William has got a video online at YouTube saying, explaining this question. Peter Williams saying, was there a Septuagint? And his answer is, well, not as, it wasn't the monolith that people assumed to be, but it certainly was not the kind of non-existent thing that the guys like Will Kinney would say it was. So there was a early Septuagint, and that's what Justin Martyr is plainly using when he quotes. And you can see some of the quotes used by the apostles. In the apostles' text, they're using a Greek text when they have particular forms of the text that do not agree. So the author of Hebrews used a Septuagint text. So obviously, the Septuagint that he used predates him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be there for him to use.
Okay. Well, I've just got two more questions, and then I'll just have a look at some of the audience comments. So what's your library like? Do you mostly work with books, or do you work with PDFs and computer stuff a lot, or both? Or
both. I like paper books. I like having a book where I know that some guy at Amazon is not going to press a button and change my book tomorrow. So I like having paper books. But I do have a Kindle here. I have Kindle. I've got flash drives. I've got my treasure chest full of flash drives.
Wow. So what's on a flash drive? That do you have like a whole bunch of Syriac manuscripts or something that you've downloaded from somewhere, or
I do have some, but mainly Greek manuscripts. I say once you see something online, as soon as you can, download it, because you never know when things will disappear. Like the British Library, you think that's foolproof. No, it's not. Things disappear online all the time. So whenever you see it, download it, put it on a flash drive, keep it away from magnets, keep it dry. And that way, when the site crashes or is available for a while, or there's a DSS attack, you'll still have the resources available.
Okay, very interesting.
So I do have books. I've got I have hold on a second. I framed this one. This is a copy of a medieval lectionary, not a lectionary, antiphonary, where people were singing the text in Latin. So I do have this. I used to have more, but I donated some of them to the Phoenix City out in Arizona. But I'd say I have probably at least 100 manuscripts here somewhere.
Wow, very interesting.
I'll say, and right here, this holds more manuscripts than many people would ever see in the lives 100 years ago. Unless you were a scholar like somebody like Scrivener or Gregory, they might see as many. But we are living in a paradise compared to what we had to do in the days of Schultz or Ruckman, where you had to actually do the legwork of going over there to Turkey or all the other places to actually find the manuscripts, and then you'd have to go and say, "Oh, somebody from Russia bought it the other day," and then you had to wait until somebody from St. Petersburg would publish it, and then after that, after the political unrest, well, the publication that you were hoping for never happened because the guy that was making it was shot. And we have we have cases of that happening. One of the greatest scholars in Russia and Ukraine was just shot because of political reasons.
Wow!
And so a lot of his work and all that knowledge in his head that he hadn't written down was gone. But the Russians have done a phenomenal amount of work, and we have yet to recognize that, because I don't think that Bruce Metzger, his work has become so dominant in TC that if Bruce Metzger didn't write about it, it didn't happen. So I think we need to have a more ecumenical, not necessarily doctrinal ecumenical, but just a more cooperative effort being made with the Orthodox in Latvia, in Estonia, in Belarus, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Georgia. If we would cooperate more and see, for instance, trying to get things out of the National Museum of Russia, this would be a big step forward. Just to have what they have put online, that would be a great step, because for now, people are having to still, even today, rely on Tischendorf and what he did, and how can we double check him? We really can't unless we go to Russia and get permission to get their files. Now in Munster, a lot of them have, but it can be improved.
Yeah, very interesting. And on your library bookshelf there, do you have any books that are like, when people come and visit you or whatever, that they go, "Oh, I want one of those," or do you have anything like that, or something that's valuable that you spent quite a lot of money on, or anything like that?
Well, I have a replica of Codex Sinaiticus over there.
Okay, well,
so there's that, and I have a book of hours over there, and a book of hours over there. This is mainly more for the artistic value than textual, but this is I like to read it.
Interesting.
Mainly for the pretty pictures. But
It's
like
that's just the codex.
And then this person was killed, and then this person was killed this way, this person was killed this way, this person had his heart torn out, this person was killed on the wheel, and so it's like it's like the early Fox's Book of Martyrs before there was Fox.
Okay. And so just my last question there, James, is besides textual criticism, what are some of your favorite topics to study? Do you have any pet projects that you just love to get involved with history or things like that?
Well, yes. I think Christoph Blake said that anybody who wants to be a good textual critic must be a master of history. And so if you want to be able to speak seriously about textual critical matters, then you have to know your church history. Know the ins and outs of Byzantium. And I would say if everybody that wants to speak about TC would first invest in a course on Byzantine history, that would save us all a lot of time. Because when you appreciate the forces that were at work, not only ideological forces, Christian forces, but also the effects of Muslim invasions from Islam, the effects of things like the plague in the days of Justinian, where he's the emperor, but he just barely avoids being stoned by his own people, and how his wife kind of saves the day. Knowing things like that and getting stories like that, having this in the equation helps to appreciate the history involved, because sometimes there's a temptation to just say, let's count out the manuscripts and go with the majority. And so you have, 85% of the manuscripts say this, so let's go with that. But I would say that is a gross oversimplification. You have to keep the history in mind and realize that these other forces were at work that were forces to standardize the text in the Middle Ages. That's where the KR sticks up. That's where Family 35 comes from. So just because it's nice and neat, that doesn't mean it's original. That doesn't mean somebody made it nice and neat. So if you go back to the Family Pi text, you have it's still not the original, but you have a earlier strata of the Byzantine text. So instead of saying a contest between Byzantine and Alexandrian, I would say no. We have a definite strata of Byzantine. We say this isn't late strata, but look at the earlier strata, and that's where you can say this was an early reading that was just as early as anything in Alexandria.
Yeah. So in my question, what are your other favorite topics to study? You haven't said Star Wars or Star Trek or anything. You've gone back to manuscripts, and so it sounds like that is your passion, and anything that you really get involved with is sort of correlated as well.
Well, I was a big Star Wars fan until the prequels.
Okay, yes.
Well, let me rephrase that. I was a fan of Star Wars. I love the first three. The prequels were tolerable, and then when these last three came, it was that was basically a dumpster fire. I refuse to accept those as canon.
Okay, yeah.
I think they should go back and have Dave Filoni come in and go all the way back to Odette Ur and go from there and just restart, because this the whole Skywalker saga, those last three, that was silly a train wreck.
Yeah.
So don't get me started on Star Wars, but I do have an appreciation for one of the most underrated science fiction I would say genres is are you familiar with Babylon 5?
No.
Oh, well, if you ever happen to see Babylon 5, it's very good science fiction. Michael Straczynski, He has written an excellent series.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about the books. I'm talking about the show.
Okay.
So you can probably find it. I think on Tubi. I don't know if you get Tubi in Australia, but on Tubi, I was happy to see just scrolling around one day. I just happened to find it. I was like, hey, all 5 seasons of 515 right here.
Wow. Okay, I'll check it out.
All right.
Yeah.
So Claudia Christian and Bruce Boxlight there, and some excellent actors playing aliens. It's a great place to go to see what the future, in theory, we like if the Lord tarries. So it's all projected about 250 years into the future.
Okay.
So that's another area that I dabble in. Is I call it, I am the first and foremost astrotheologian.
Okay.
Well, I basically it's an entirely hypothetical field, but I wonder, but I ask the question of, if we were to encounter alien life and it's sentient, what then? So if I find the time someday, I'll write a book about astrotheology.
Okay. We would have a cover like E.F. Hills's first edition with the spaceship on it.
Say again?
It'll have a cover on it like E.F. Hills's first edition of Defending the King James with a spaceship on it and a moon.
Well, E.F. Hills, I believe that he was not a geocentrist, but he believed that the Earth was still at the center of things. He I believe embraced Tycho Brahe's model of the solar system. Okay. It's not a model that anybody should embrace today. Obviously, the sun is at the center of the solar system. But I think that illustration comes from having that view.
Okay, interesting. So I'll just quickly go through some of Dwayne's comments and questions here. Someone, a Bible highlighter, has asked, have you seen Mike Holner's new article for evidence of the comma, the Lakava Bible?
No.
No, okay. And Dwayne said, or actually Dwayne said, do you think 1 John 5:7 is a Western reading?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say we're referring to 1 John 5:7. It's a bit of a true question, because there is a verse 7 that has nothing to do with the comma. But we usually refer to 1 John 5:7. The comma is the focus. So I would say more carefully, the comma was a Western reading. I believe that Western scribes, when they saw the phrase talking about the 3 witnesses, they transposed the text to say the water, the blood, and the spirit, because in this way they turn to Jeremiah 2:17 and say God is the fountain of many waters, so that's the Father. And then we have the incarnation, you have the Word, living Word, as the Son, and then we have Spirit, of course, you have Spirit. So these 3 representations of water, blood, and spirit were seen allegorically to represent the Father, the incarnate Word, and the Holy Spirit. And then somebody added in the comma, not in Greek, but in Latin. It's probably in Numidia, in probably either the late 200s or the early 300s. But once it was in place, it became a very popular reading in Africa. By the time of the Council of Carthage in 4044, most of the people that had Latin text of 1 John had the comma in their text. Eugene, who was at the Council of Carthage, having to give an account to the Arian king, Gensric. Gensric, by the way, was suspected of being the Antichrist at the time. You can still find Latin Bibles of Revelation where the name Genseric is considered the name of the Antichrist, because it happens that his name does add up to 666. So Genseric, being the king of the Arians, some of the council, it wasn't an official church council, but Genseric being the political guy in charge, had the Orthodox come and present their case. And so Eugene was happy to come and have this council, but after he first presented his case, it didn't get very far after that, and the whole council fell into confusion. But you can still see from the record of the council that Eugene had the comma in his Latin text. When you look at the comma as it exists in Greek, what you see in the TR is an amalgamation. You don't have the exact words of the comma in Greek unless you have a text that is translated from a printed copy. When the comma was found in manuscript 661, it was not exactly what Erasmus ended up printing. But to go into the details about that, I have a series of posts on my blog again. I'll just, not to throw you there again, but on my blog, I have a series of posts. If you search there for the word comma, about 5 different blog posts will pop up. Some dealing with the question of where did the comma come from? And again, I say it came from Latin in the North African text in Numidia. And then it grew from there, and eventually spread to affect the Vulgate. And by the time Alcuin was done revising the Vulgate, in the Middle Ages, it became the dominant Vulgate reading. And even if you go back to Codex Valdensis, you'll see that it was known to whoever wrote the preface to the canonical Gospels, because he references the comma. He also references the order of the 3 witnesses of water, blood, spirit. So that transposition is very important, because without it, you don't get the natural framework to have Father, Incarnate Word, and Holy Spirit. But once you have that transposition of water, blood, spirit, then you naturally have the thematic connection to what you would know as the 3 heavenly witnesses.
Okay. So just as we sort of come to a conclusion here, James, you've written a book, the Textual Analysis, New Testament Textual Analysis. Yes. I'll just show this, and maybe you can explain to people what this book is.
This book is kind of my answer to Hort, my answer to Wallace, my answer to certainly to James White. In this book, I try to lay the groundwork to tell people Hort's big theory of linguistic recension never happened. While there may have been later developments that would standardize the Byzantine text, at the core of the Byzantine text, there is a significant core, just like church thought, that is an ancient collection of ancient readings. So the Byzantine text should be taken seriously and not rejected like it was by Nestle and Allen and by the UBS committee.
Okay, very interesting.
And when you reject the English interpretation, then you will get then you see the text is hanging in the midair. What is the foundation? Where does the Byzantine text come from? And I go into detail about that in my book. I also examine specific points of variation that affect our manuscripts to this day. I point out that if you use the Alexandrian text and rely on it, unless you have a presumption to say, okay, we're going to make this text inerrant and then many evangelical scholars, myself included, believe that the original text is inerrant. But Allen did not. Metzger did not. And Nestle did not. And Hort, if you read Hort's 1881 introduction and in notes on select readings, you'll see that in Matthew 27:49, Hort was willing to put that either in the text or in a very prominent footnote as an alternate reading. But if you have that reading in the text, you have an error, because in Matthew 27:49, and again on my blog, if you Google, if you search for Matthew 27:49 and look for that, I have a extensive blog post just about that. But if you have that reading, which is in Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and some others like L, once you have that reading embraced, you will have an errant text. So those who accept the Alexandrian text should realize the people that had the Alexandrian text had a text that was errant. They had this contradiction between Matthew's account and John's. Okay. And I think if more evangelicals would realize this, they would be less inclined to accept the Alexandrian just because it's older. The Alexandrian text often gets a free pass, and people say, "Oh, well, trust the oldest readings." If you go to my blog and look for the words "hand to hand," I have about a dozen and a half posts where I'm comparing an old text to the medieval text, and time after time, the medieval text is more accurate, using as the standard of comparison the Nestle text. So time after time, age has nothing to do with accuracy.
Yeah, very good. And so I'll just put the link here in the chat for people who want to go to James Snapp's website. And there's a few other books that you've written as well. Yes. Here. So Reaching and Teaching Through Preaching.
Yes. That's a manual I made for beginning preachers, maybe for like a freshman course in college or seminary, just to teach about how to reach and teach while you preach.
Okay, very interesting.
Because like Paul said, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. And if that means stepping people's toes, then so be it.
No, that's good. That's good.
Also, the book, Is It Eclectic? Where I look at the Nestle text and say, is this really eclectic or is it simply Alexandrian? And I go, it's basically a collection of data where I just demonstrate over and over. Look, they're basically tossing out the Byzantine text just because it's Byzantine, and embracing the Alexandrian text. 99% of the time, not 100%, but like I said, 99% of the time in Matthew through Jude, it is Alexandrian. So the what they call, what Daniel Wallace calls the text of recent eclecticism is not really eclectic. It's like saying, okay, we have the Byzantine text is on the team, but the Alexandrian text is what goes on the field.
Yeah, it sort of seems like saying something's multicultural, but it's only just white Americans sort of thing. It hasn't got anyone else in the photo.
Or it's saying, okay, we'll have the Byzantine text here as a mascot. Whenever we want to say, oh, we have an embarrassment of riches. What Daniel Wallace is saying is that even though it may look like an embarrassment of riches in terms of numbers, in real life, then Wallace says, okay, 99% of the time, all those coins out there are counterfeit, and we'll go with these half a dozen manuscripts here. Sometimes only two, sometimes only one, sometimes none.
That'll make a good little soundbite, I think. What you just said there, very interesting. Um, so some of the other books, The World's Oldest Bible, Reliable or Liability.
Yes, that's a deep dive into Codex Sinaiticus. Codex Sinaiticus was produced in the 300s. Unlike what David Daniels of Chick Publications keeps saying online, he has he has deceived quite a few people, including himself, thinking that Sinaiticus is a late manuscript. It's not. Having the latter page of Hermas that were discovered in the new finds in 1975, that alone proves conclusively that Simonides was a liar, not to be relied upon at all, and the whole Simonides made Sinaiticus theory is nonsense. But I do go into this book about look at the readings of Sinaiticus and compare it to what you would have in a typical Byzantine manuscript, like the King James is based on. Even though the TR isn't exactly Byzantine, but in terms of, is it more Byzantine than anything else? Yes, by far. So in this book, I go into looking at Sinaiticus and saying, look what Sinaiticus is saying, because you see how it was made. Sinaiticus was apparently made by dictation, and the scribe doing the dictation did not do a very good job. He was a lousy. Well, there were more than one scribe, but the main one in the New Testament was a very horrible spell. If there was a way to misspell a word, he would find it. But I go into this and just looking in details at, look at this manuscript that you say is so old, it's very important, and you say this manuscript has transformed a way of having the New Testament. It was the basis for Hort's work in 1881. It's been the basis since then. But I say, have you ever looked at these readings that we have here and how bad they are? And so I put a spotlight on Sinaiticus in this book.
Okay, interesting. And then, of course, you've got your Mark 16.
Yes.
You got two books there, or is that just the one with the different cover?
Well, the authentic the case for Mark 16 and 20. That's the new 4th edition.
Wow. Okay, interesting. That looks really nice. Yeah.
The third one's still there, but the 4th edition is the one you want because it's more up to date. There are witnesses that I list in this book that you'll never find in any popular apparatus.
Okay, and like Kindle prices, like here in Australia, it's like $8, that's probably about $5 American, so it's very cheap. And you're getting a lot of research here. So even people who would gravitate towards a TR position and want to defend the last 12 verses of Mark, this is. Well, when I did a debate against Stephen Boyce, I actually grabbed James Snapp's material on the Pericope Adulterae. It was very helpful, and even to this day, that's sort of like the position that I tend to default to. I'm like, well, that there's a lot of really good research there.
And you're looking at the 3rd edition, but there is a 4th edition now.
Okay, so you got a 4th edition out now.
Yes. Now the 4th edition is more expensive because I need the money, but it has everything not quite fully up to date, but as up to date as you're going to get as of 2024.
Okay, and is that on Amazon?
Yes.
Okay.
And then you have my book, Jesus and the Adulteress.
Yes.
If you just type in Jesus and the Adulteress.
Yes, here it is.
That's my defense of the Pericope Adulterae, where I go into detail about how I just step by step looking back. How if you look at just the footnotes, they say have a translation like the CSB. If all you have is the footnote, you'll think, oh well, this is a floating pericope. It's a floating anecdote. And they'll say, oh, well, if it's jumping around, it must be a floating anecdote. That's how Dan Wallace pictured it. I go step by step and say, No, did not begin as a floating pericopay. It began right where it is now, after John 7:52. If you look at the old Latin chapter summaries, the capitula, in the old Latin chapter summaries, it very plainly shows the story of the adulteress right after what comes before in John 7. And right after it comes Jesus saying, I'm the light of the world. So the old Latin chapter summaries in one particular form called the COI form, which means from the time of Cyprian or shortly thereafter, that's 2nd century. So if you have the Latin chapter summaries in the 2nd century, that pretty much takes us back to nearly the time of our oldest evidence of John, P75.
Well, and so that you were talking about the capitula. So that's the
yes, these heading. Are the in old Latin copies. Oftentimes they did not just have the text; they would often preface the text with a summary of the chapters, and so these chapter summaries were called the capitula. We have in later copies echoes of earlier copies that go back to the time of Cyprian. And most of this is, I don't think it's ever been represented in English, but a guy in France about 100 years ago put it all in a book. And I have links to his book on my blog. But he basically showed how this when you had St. Pelagia's Day, you had a text for a special reason. When we had Pentecost, the story of the woman caught in adultery didn't have a whole lot to do with Pentecost. And so, because you want the theme of the day to be Pentecost, you would skip over the story of the woman caught in adultery, leave that for St. Pelagia's Day, October 8th. For Pentecost, you would simply keep from John 7:37 to the end of the chapter, and then finish it off with verse 7, because that's a great way to end the day's homily, would be to say, then Jesus said, I'm the light of the world, when he's presented the idea of the Spirit is going to come. And that would be, of course, a great segue to talk about Pentecost. So, the lection for Pentecost would skip over the story of adultery being John 7:53. And as Morris Robinson has pointed out, these people that think that it was a floating adultery, that it was a floating anecdote, that it was just a independent story. How many stories start out with, and then everybody went home?
Yeah. And it seems like the last 12 verses of Mark, that it sort of ends with that type of abruption if you don't have those verses in there.
Yes. Without Mark 16:19-20, you do have a very non-Markan way of ending the book. Now, some people say, "Oh, we found books that end in gar." Well, yes, you have found speeches. You have not found narratives. The Gospel of Mark is a narrative. What other narrative ends in gar? None. So I go in authentic the case from Mark 16:19-20. I go into not only the external evidence, which is overwhelming, but also go into the internal evidence, and I examine the claims, like, Mark 16:20, it has so many non-Markan phrases, whereas in real life, of all 12 verses of Mark, if you divide all the 12 verse sections of Mark in 12 verse segments, Mark 16:20, in terms of how many once used words it has, it comes in 8. So there are several other, at least half a dozen other 12 verse segments of Mark that have more once used words than Mark 16:19-20. But this is hardly ever pointed out by commentators, because so many commentators are still, when they want to do research, they just pick up, oh, I've got this. I'll just read Metzger and know everything there is to know. So the hand of Metzger is still echoing throughout many, many commentators. And if you see a commentary where we see a footnote that says, oh, Metzger says this, know that you're reading something obsolete.
Yeah. And so, so I'd recommend people go to Amazon and type in James Snapp's material. And one thing that's very interesting is like say the last 12 verses of Mark, the Pericope Adulteri. Like these are things that TR defenders really need to know this stuff if they want to defend the Textus Receptus position. So, oftentimes we gravitate towards the scholarship of James Snapp in these places. Now, of course, we have differences. We have debated on certain things in the past, but I didn't want this to be, us putting our boxing gloves on, but more just to have a general chat and talk about some things that we can have a cordial discussion about. But I've had a really good time, James. I don't know about you, but I think that's a good place to end it, unless you got something else you want to chat about.
Well, I would say to Derek, I see a comment from Derek coming up. Derek, if you go on YouTube and search for my debate that I had with the Stephen Avery about Titanicus, there is a short version and also a long version because the debate went on for quite a long time. But in the course of the debate, I put on a slide that shows the page of Hermes that Simonides did not know about because it had not yet been discovered. This was among the new finds. This page from Hermes, from near the end of Hermes, Simonides was a terrible liar. I mean, he was a skilled liar, but that made him all the more terrible. But he said in his writings, Simonides claimed that he had these pages of parchment, and he was using that to make this replica copy, and he was going to produce the book of Hermes, but then after he'd done the first part, the pages ran out. Well, in real life, in 1975, when they found the new finds at St. Catherine's Monastery, they found a page from Hermes toward the end. And I go into detail, and if you take the time to watch the debate and watch the slides they present, you'll see that there are slides. I show the page from Hermes. It looks like the silhouette of a camel, kind of, if you use your imagination. But that page from Hermes proves that Simonides was lying. He never knew that Hermes was finished in Sinaiticus, but this page shows that it clearly was. So you could just look at this page and think about it, and you'll see that Simonides, yes, was lying and did not have anything to do with the production of Codex Sinaiticus. He was embarrassed by Tischendorf because when Simonides had been in Germany, he was trying to sell forgeries to some scholars there in Leipzig. And Tischendorf had been called in as an expert to say, okay, Tischendorf, is this guy selling us a real manuscript or is it fake? Well, one of the things that forgers do is they take something that's partly real and then enhance it to make it look older than it really is. So what Simonides had done was he took a real manuscript of something and tried very carefully to make it look like a palimpsest of something older. So what Tischendorf did was Tischendorf had exceptional eyesight, and using lenses, he was able to say, look, what Simonides is saying was the underwriting is actually the overwriting. So this is a fraud. So you guys should not only not buy this, but you should arrest Simonides because he's the forger. So now Simonides was not without his own sponsors, and he was able to leave town, get out of Dodge in time. So he was not put on arrest. There was a warrant out for his arrest, but that would be the motivation that Simonides had to try to embarrass Tischendorf by saying, "Oh, I wrote it," but it didn't take very long for the scholars to work out. No, Simonides did not write it. He's lying. Scrivener very, very clearly made a refutation of Simonides. It's in the old Observer of 1863. If you can dig that up on archive.org. On my blog, again, I have the embedded links in some of my articles there. But there's no chance that Simonides had anything to do with the production of Codex Sinaiticus. It is a 4th century manuscript, probably made, by the way, at Caesarea, using some of the manuscripts from Egypt, because we do have a record from Jerome that during the time when two guys named Acacius and Euzoius were bishops, in their days, the parchments at Caesarea were gradually running away. And so they made it their work to transfer from papyrus to parchment the works that they found in the library. Because, like the rest of the world that was in Egypt, in Caesarea, papyrus were out. So when Origen brought his library from Egypt to Caesarea, it had a expiration date, and that expiration date was coming in the mid 300s. So in the days of Acacius Euzoius, I believe that is when we have Sinaiticus being made, and they happen to be both either Arians or Arian sympathizers. Now that doesn't mean that that their theological tendencies would affect their work, but you can see here and there, not very far, but here and there, I do suspect that some readings had this very slight tinge of their theology affecting the text. John 1:18 would be a point in particular. Also, here and there in a Vaticanus' text of Romans, and also in Sinaiticus' text of Revelation, then you have the pendulum swings the way, and the scribe is trying to make the text more orthodox than it really is. Orthodox by his definition.
So just one bit of tidy up here. Dwayne Green has said, we missed a book, The Identity of the New Testament by Wilbur Pickering. So I've got that one here.
I got it. Over there.
Do you want to just give us a quick rundown? Because Wilbur Pickering, he does seem like a bit of a stray cat. He doesn't seem to be accepted in some circles. But what he says is oftentimes very powerful. It's very interesting. But can you give us a quick little bit of a rundown on Wilbur Pickering, and then we might shut it down after that?
Yes, I would say Pickering has done a service to the church by showing us the Family 35 text, because Pickering, if you go to his Prunch site, he promotes the Family 35 text as being the original text. He says, here we have a definitive archetype, and you don't see that as clearly anywhere else. So he would say, this has to be the original text. Now, in real life, Parpilov, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Parpilov has made an effective critique and said what Pickering thought was early medieval text was actually a later text. And the Family 35 text is definitely, if you look at both the text and the paratext that goes with it, meaning the things like the chapter summaries, the forms of the CBD canons, all the apparatus that goes with it, the lectionary apparatus, these things all together point to a later date, not an earlier date. So I don't think William Pickering takes that adequately into consideration. If he did, he wouldn't say these things he said. But he does present the medieval text as it was presented in the majority of manuscripts. After I'd say the year 800 or so, you have that's where the final stages of revision come into play. So Pickering would be a champion of the Family 35 text. I'm not, so I would obviously disagree about quite a bit there. But he does point out the value of the medieval text did not come out of nowhere. Many of the minuscules those are simply echoes of magic jewels. So we shouldn't say, "Oh, it's minuscule, so let's ignore it." No. Over and over and over again, I've shown on my blog that the text of your average minuscule is better than the text of this ancient minuscule. So that means the scribes in the transmission stream that produced the Family 35 text, even though that is as a whole a later text, they were more careful over 1,000 years than the scribes of a manuscript like Sinaiticus were in over 300 years. So, in other words, the scribes working in Egypt made more mistakes than in 300 years than the scribes of the Byzantine text made in 1,000.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, James. I think we'll end the video there. And yeah, like Wilbur Pickering, he's an interesting guy. I actually contacted him last week to see if he would do an interview, and he hasn't gotten back to me yet. But hopefully he'll write back at some stage. He's still making videos on YouTube. Like oftentimes, I'm just looking for things just to keep my interest. And he's sometimes just live there doing, talking about Westcott and Hort and talking about all sorts of things. And so it's quite fascinating.
I would say one of the things that I think is so important is the textual critic should be detached. And it's one of the hardest things to do is to step back and say, the scientific goal is simply to reconstruct the text of the New Testament books. Just like if we were trying to reconstruct the text of Shakespeare or Marlowe or some medieval writer, many of the same principles come into play. So without having any ideological or theological presumptions, what does the original text say? And with faith in God to be inerrant because he's God, then we proceed to have, after you've done the calculation and then you look back, then you can say, we have here an inerrant text. But to go into the text and say, oh, if we see a reading that is problematic or that appears problematic, then it can't be original. That's when you're making a dogmatic case. And to try to be detached from your dogmatism, that is a very hard thing to do. But I think that is a fundamental step in disciplining yourself as a textual critic to be resolved to say that should be our primary goal, to simply follow the evidence where it leads.
All right, James. I think I'll end the stream around about here. And so, is there anything else you just want to say to the audience, or you think you've said enough so far?
I say, feel free to go to my blog. Again, use the search bar. I don't cover every verse or every variant by far, but if you're curious about a verse, try putting that in the search bar and see what pops up. For some variants, I cover a whole lot. For some, I do a little. Verses like Matthew 6:13, I covered that, and many more individual verses, phrases, sometimes individual words. But it's all in my blog, and it should be out in a book called Textual Commentary on the Greek Archetype of the Gospels in January.
Okay.
When I say archetype, that's different from autograph. In the archetype, when I see, for instance, a contracting number in a sacra, and that's in the oldest manuscript, that's what goes in the archetype. Even though I can say I am very, very confident that in the autograph it was spelled out, but in the evidence we only have the contraction. So that's as far as you go, and then we extrapolate from there.
That's very good, and I appreciate you coming on, and especially you said earlier that you had the cold. You got a cold and runny nose and got all the symptoms of that. So you've done really well. We've gone for 2 hours and 22 minutes. I noticed you had a bit of a cough there. I wasn't sure if that was the judgment of God. Gail Rippling might be watching. She might write a little bit of a blog about that. And
I do have a post about one of her books.
Yeah, I've got one of hers here, and I don't agree with it. But
it's she basically she knows just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. But okay, thanks James for coming on. I'm gonna say goodbye now, and we'll chat in the next month or so, and maybe I can get you back on to chat about something else, or maybe we can do a debate or something like that, have a bit of fun with that. But I'll say goodbye to you, and then I'm just going to play my outro. And so, yeah, go for it.
I would say, if anybody sees the latest edition of my books, and if they think that they're too expensive, because not everybody has discretionary funds, just email me. I'm on Facebook about every day. Just contact me on Facebook, and I'll send you a copy for free.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's great.
Everybody else, please go buy my books, and I'll have another one in January, God willing. So I think that's about it, Nick. So just Viscom, and have a good night.
Thanks for joining me, James.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, well that was very interesting. That was fun, and yeah, we recently had a debate, probably maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and I thought I'd get James on because oftentimes I do go through James's website and look at material, and like when I debated Stephen Boyce a few years ago, I relied heavily on a lot of James's material on the Pericope Adulterae. And so that was very helpful for me. And so I thought, I thought I'd get James on just so we could pick his brains also about how he does study, what his interests are. And so sometimes it's good to know where people are coming from. And thanks for joining us, guys. I'm just going to play my little outro, and then I think I'm going to stop. And so I can see you're still there, James, but I'm gonna finish it up and play my little outro. And then if you want to contact any more, we can just chat on Facebook. But God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.